I'm going to start off by trying to provide you with some context in terms of the problem that we're trying to solve. And this problem has been around for some time now. If you look at a typical school classroom from the 1920s, the 1980s, or even today, fundamentally, nothing has changed in classroom-based education. And when we look at the way a classroom is constructed, it's set up in rows and columns, 6 kids in a row, five rows, taught 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. That model was designed and developed during the Industrial Revolution to massify education. And it's done a great job at that. It has massified education. On the flip side, we find that we test the kids across all years in Australia in years 3, 5, 7, 9, and year 12. And we know that every child is at a different place in their learning journey. And how do we try and support them through that? We put children of the same age, learning the same content, in the same class, in front of the same teacher. And that's led to a disconnect in terms of the learning outcomes. And when we look at the performance of Australian school children, notwithstanding the vast amounts of investment that have taken place through increases in government funding, we see continuing declines in our educational outcomes when you compare Australia to other OECD countries. And the gap is getting bigger and bigger. I'm often asked whether this problem, where we see kids or parents looking to augment their learning, their school-based learning, by turning outside of the classroom for their support, as being a COVID-induced phenomenon. In fact, quite the contrary. When we ideated Cluey back in 2017, we saw a stark issue that existed with massive differences in achievement gaps. And the Grattan Institute has done some really interesting work where they quantified that the existing achievement gap amongst the kids in our schools in Australia is more than 10 times greater than the gap that would have been developed during the COVID-19 disruption. So the problem has been around for a long time. COVID has simply accelerated it. We go to the next slide, please. So in essence, what does Cluey do? And I'll frame this up very simply, then I'll go into some detail for you. Cluey augments traditional schooling for K-12 students across Australia with a range of comprehensive learning services. Our core business is we focus on delivering live, online, one-to-one and small group tutoring, fully mapped to the local curriculum, using our own adaptive proprietary learning platforms that support individual student learning needs and progress. We make extensive use of data and learning analytics to power the learning that every child receives to Cluey. We cover all school years from years 2 to 12 in maths and English, and we have chemistry for years 11 and 12 as well. We're just about to release 2 new subjects, which I'll talk about shortly. Our core focus as a business is we're a B2C business. We deal directly with parents and students. We don't sell to schools or through schools, although more recently, as we became approved under the New South Wales COVID Intensive Learning Support Program, we're now delivering services into schools. Also, more recently, we made a move into our first acquisition, which is in the adjacent or extracurricular area of coding. And we'll talk about that a little later because we share a common customer data layer where the same parents and students are consuming the curriculum aligned content and learning are now also outside the classroom, are now also consuming other types of learning to support their co and extracurricular desires. We're defining and leading the sector. We have seen a massive and accelerating shift to online learning support before COVID and more recently with COVID. Our core academic services make use of data and proprietary learning analytics to optimize every single interaction, and that enables us to constantly refine the value of our services. Can we go to the next page, please? And this is a big market. In Australia, there are around 4 million children, school children, and around 1.6 million of these kids are using tutoring or considering using tutoring in the next 12 months. And a further 2 million students use or considering using other forms of learning support outside the classroom besides tutoring. So our total addressable market in the core tutoring and test prep space is around 1.6 million customers, and the broader learning support space is around 3.6 million customers. And in the main, as parents and students historically have turned outside the classroom for learning support, they've turned to tutoring and test prep, which is also highly traditional. You either go to a learning center, which is a better version of a classroom, or have a tutor come to your home, or you go to their tutor, and that we refer to as the pay and pray model. You have no idea what they're doing with your kids. As you move into the online model, and if you deploy data and learning analytics to support all the learning, you can define and deliver a far more optimal learning solution, which I'll talk about shortly. Next slide, please. So when we think about what Cluey does, it's not simply about matching a student to a tutor. That is an important piece, but it is not the only piece. For great teaching and learning to happen, we need 4 key elements to come together, all simultaneously. You need all of the curriculum and content designed and built digitally in micro bite-sized chunks, all scoped and sequenced correctly, available for the student and the tutor to work on. You then match the student to the tutor who's highly cognate in the discipline, which is the coach or the mentor working through the learning program with the student. This all needs to happen in a live, synchronous online learning environment with full video, audio, and collaborative whiteboard. You need to deliver targeted practice between the learning sessions. That's all auto-marked, graded, and feedback provided. And then you need to measure every single element of the learning interaction to deliver quantitative analytical feedback, and you get the feedback from the tutor to get you the qualitative feedback, which then reshapes their learning program for the following week. Next slide, please. So we built all of those systems and processes. We built them out in 2017 and went live with our first learning programs delivered in 2018. So we built full video, audio, collaborative whiteboard learning environments, fully transparent, fully synchronous, because young children need to learn synchronously, not asynchronously. And we take all the load off the tutor because all the content curriculum is all there. The teaching and learning methodology is all baked in, and the auto marking of the students' work is done through our platforms. And we sit all of the learning platforms and environments on top of our enterprise level platforms that enables us to manage large volumes of students and operate at scale. Next page, please. So people often ask me, so how do we really use this data? Like that's the secret sauce in Cluey. So we measure every interaction, around 100,000 data points in every learning session. The audio track of the student, the audio track of the tutor, the video track of the student, the video track of the tutor. What content was consumed by whom and when, in what order? How much time did they spend on that content? What questions were answered? By whom? Was the student helped? Was the student not helped? What did the student get right? What did the student get wrong? We measure all of that. We now have a data lake of more than 17 billion data points, and we can use that to benchmark each individual learning session against. So we record all of this and we feed it through our AI, and it does a full quality assurance review of every single learning session. And we can click in if there is any deviation in terms of what's happening in that session. We'll flag it to us. We'll go straight in at minute 27. There was a deviation from the learning program. We can see it, it's fully recorded. And we use this information to also optimize the tutor matching and the tutor performance. We use this to get feedback from the student on the tutor. And we use this information to then optimize the teaching and learning development programs for our tutors to deliver better learning programs. Next page, please. And we know that our offering is now achieving widespread appeal and is developing scale. We know this because we have a high, our student demographics matches almost identically ABS data. We have a high proportion of our students in public schools. 61% of our students are in public schools and around half our students are in primary schools. We know we've got the pricing levels right. We charge $80 for a weekly service for one-on-one, and we charge $50 a week for our weekly service for small group. And between those two price points, we've been able to get mass appeal across all of Australia. Next page, please. So here's a quick snapshot of how the business has been growing. When we went live with our first paid sessions back in July 2018, the big question everybody asked me was, will school students learn online? 3 years later, that question has been answered emphatically, and not surprisingly so, because we are dealing with the most digitally native humans the world has ever seen. Now, the real question that I think needs to be asked is, will school children want to learn purely in a classroom? And if you have a look at the charts in the slide, in terms of student sessions, we have been scaling significantly, and in terms of our revenues, we have continued to scale significantly. And this is showing the strong tailwinds behind our business as this mass shift to online learning has occurred with school-based education. Next page, please. Here's a quick snapshot of how our business has been performing. In Q1 of financial year 22, we managed to get our customer acquisition cost down 18% compared to the prior corresponding period to $468 per student. In terms of average lifetime revenue, we generate around $2,181 of average lifetime revenue. And after the tutor cost, that generates around $1,145 of lifetime value. And if you compare the lifetime value metric to our customer acquisition cost, we generate around $2.4 of lifetime revenue after the tutor cost relative to the customer acquisition component. So for every dollar we spend, we generate $2.4 of net revenues. And that means every single student that we acquire adds more to revenues than to costs, and that allows us to then deploy that surplus down to covering our overhead. So it then becomes a scale play. The unit economics will stack up. The more students we are able to enroll, the faster we get to profitability. We've scaled our tutor base, which consists of two components. 30% are teachers, 70% are uni students, to around now just under 1,700 tutors across Australia, all recruited by us, trained by us, developed by us, quality assured by us. In terms of student sessions in the quarter, we delivered 122,000 student sessions, which was up 132% from 53,000 the prior period. We generated 2x increase in new students, which delivered 2.3x increase in sessions, 2.3x increase in revenue, and a 2.4 times increase in gross profit. So if we can just go to the next slide, please, Tim. One more. In terms of growing faster, harder, we are growing exponentially. We're using data and learning analytics to optimize and scale the growth even faster, to drive improvements to our core service. We're adding new subjects that will be launched in January 2022. We're launching in our first international market, New Zealand. Soft launched already, full launch in January. We have developed a business-to-business model now where we are delivering our services in schools. And in terms of strategic M&A, we are now scaling our business into those areas that are adjacent to the core. And we announced our first acquisition around 4 weeks ago with the acquisition of CodeCamp, which is the largest provider of coding and digital skills education to school children. I'm happy to turn to questions.
Thanks, Mark. Coding, that's something I should have learned. Now, can you talk about how you acquire a student?
Sure.
How do they find you, and do you work with schools?
Sure. So we are primarily a B2C business, or historically all the education businesses I've built have been B2C. That enables us to take full ownership and control of the education and have direct line of sight of the students' performance. How do we recruit our students? The core paid search, paid social channels, Google, Facebook, Instagram. We spend a lot on brand. More than 20% of all our media spend goes on brand. We are on channel 7, 9, 10. So, you know, we have a big digital marketing team of nearly 10 people. And we're continuing to scale and drive that customer acquisition cost down all the time. We've seen the brand now really starting to come to the fore with the volume of branded search increasing all the time. I think there are two questions that have come up here.
Yeah, let me get to those. I'll summarize those quickly. One of the issues, do you think you'll see any online fatigue post, children learning all those school hours online?
It's a great question. I think I've often been asked, has the business been a recipient of the COVID benefit? And I've felt around 10% where it has been the push because of that shift to online. We don't think there is going to be any reason why students are going to move offline. When we look at the scale and rate at which this shift to online has occurred, it has emulated what happened in post-schooling education. The challenge was never the students. The challenge was always the parents and the teachers. But for the first time in history, the government mandated every child must learn online. Tim, there is no way we're going back. I can't see it.
No, it makes sense.
I just cannot see it. We can't keep them off the screens.
I mean, there is a question here that the importance of kind of face-to-face learning for child development.
Yep.
Do you see yourself kind of developing your learning models around that, as in offering that face-to-face as well?
So I often say to people, we are face-to-face. We're just not in your place. We are face-to-face, live, online, fully collaborative tool set. As you work on the whiteboard, it's there. It's shown to everyone. We have group learning with up to 5 students, all working fully live, fully synchronously, fully online. So this boundary between physical face-to-face and virtual face-to-face is being eroded.
Gotcha. And what about the subjects you offer, maths, chemistry? Are you looking to expand those learning subjects moving forward?
So yeah, so biology and physics will go live now. They go live in January. Chemistry is live. Maths and English are live. The next coding is now live. And remember, coding is mandated in the national curriculum. The problem is most schools don't do it well or at all because teachers can't code and coders don't want to be teachers. So that's why we're teaching it outside of the classroom, because that's the only place we can get access to thousands of computer science students and software engineers who are so keen to teach coding to young kids.
That makes sense. Time for 2 more questions. Who are your major competitors in Australia, and what's your kind of timeline to be cash flow positive?
Major competitors, in the learning center space, there are only 2 reasonable sized brands. There's Kumon and Kip McGrath. The challenge with both of those is they are pretty traditional learning centers, a better version of a classroom, and they're a fully franchised network. I think the major competitor to us is the local tutor, the tutor who will come to your home or you'll go to the local tutor. The challenge with that, as parents are discovering more and more, is that is the pay and pray model. They work with your kid, they spend time with your kid, you have no visibility on what they're doing, you pay and you pray till that next report card comes to know if it's working. Whereas with Cluey, it's all about the transparency of the data and the information on exactly how your child is performing every single week. In terms of getting to profitability and break even, we will have our first profitable months in FY23, and we expect FY24 to pretty much be our first full year of break even.